Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Inkstained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, they tried to take you out. They tried to take you down, but you are undefeated. Congratulations on surviving your illness.
I am standing on 2 feet.
And you're feeling better?
Starting to feel better, yes.
Yes, well, we're very glad. We're very glad.
So apologies for coming to everyone a day late, but that is
but I was going to say the good news is we have even more excellence as a result of recording on Friday morning instead of Thursday morning. We have an even fuller creel of the bass of excellence.
Should we get to our front page?
Do it.
All of the campus insanity, but before we get to that, we wanted to quickly touch on Biden's decision to pause weapons shipments to Israel. And Reuters has the following piece wanting to ensure that everybody knows that Biden is not doing enough to shiv our closest ally in the Middle East. Israel due to get billions of dollars more in U.S. weapons despite Biden pause. And the first sentence of the piece is, billions of dollars worth of U.S. weaponry remains in the pipeline for Israel, despite the delay of one shipment of bombs and a review of others by President Joe Biden's administration. Concerned their use in an assault could wreak more devastation on Palestinian civilians. Subtle.
Yeah.
Subtle.
So it's subtle. It's like that. We do not have this piece in here, but it's the idea of Biden. Well, maybe I'll put it this way: not mentioned in this piece, and you can go down quite a long time. You can read on in this piece for quite a long time, and you don't get to the other side. It's not so, as you say, the framing of the piece is Biden wants you to think that he's cutting off Israel. But the truth is, there's still all of this weaponry going to Israel. And it's phrased in strictly the context of what he is failing to do to protect civilians in Gaza and in Rafah, particularly. And not mentioned, even in a passing, to be sure, or maybe it's here and I didn't see it. But the more obvious political story right now, which is the furious outrage of Jewish groups and the furious outrage of pro-Israel Americans. And this has been there
is a moderate contingent of Democrats that are speaking out against this as well.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the Jewish American community, but I know that when you can get squishy, moderate Jewish groups to line up with right-wing Jewish groups in denouncing Biden on this, I know something is cooking. I know there's more here than just a handful of Jewish Americans. And by the way, if it were only a handful of Jewish Americans, Pennsylvania, we've heard this is a coverage imbalance. People in the news media sympathize with people on the left, we know, and they sympathize with younger people. They sympathize with the smallest minority possible. And part of that's a really good impulse, right? Standing up for the little guy. I get it. But there are dangers in this idea about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable and reducing things to this. It's the same sort of settler colonial narrative that has distorted a lot of the understanding about what's going on between Hamas and Israel. But we've heard so much about Arab American voters in Michigan over and over and over again. And I know this is I've been harping on this, but Pennsylvania has lots of Jewish voters, lots and lots of Jewish voters. And as we get to the point where you were starting to see more of a united front among Jewish groups. This tells me that the political peril for Biden in the most important swing state, there's no story in which Joe Biden loses Pennsylvania that I can tell and wins the presidency. If he loses Pennsylvania, the biggest swing state, and quite a democratic, much more democratic than North Carolina, much more democratic than Georgia, much more democratic than Arizona. If he loses Pennsylvania, he's not going to win. And the imbalance in coverage and emphasis here has been very telling.
I would just add to that the Israel issue is a potent one in American politics, not because of the power of Jewish voters, but because of the enormous number of Christians who care about the
Sure.
issue. And that's why it resonates. And the fact is that the majority Christian population in this country is supportive of Israel.
Now,
And that is what Biden needs to worry about, is that his policies here are alienating the average person who's supportive of Israel, not the relatively small Jewish population. Of course, that's true too, but the average person in this country supports Israel, and he is. And we have a wonderful column in the Beacon this morning by your colleague Matt Continetti, and he is in lockstep with the Bernie Sanders wing on this issue that is not reflective of where the average person in this country is.
I don't know if he's in lockstep with Bernie Sanders
on this issue.
I think, and you'll forgive me, I'm working out a piece that I'm going to write after we're done, but I think Joe Biden is a average politician in this way, and he's had sort of an average presidency so far. But he's an average politician in which he, like a metronome, goes back and forth and back and forth. So you're going to go talk to Jewish leaders at the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and you're going to take your toughest line on anti-Semitism yet. Okay, there you go. What's the very next thing you do? Infuriate Jewish Americans and pro-Israel Americans. And most of the pro-Israel, the strongly pro-Israel voters are already Republicans. But there are some, right? There are some. You infuriate all of those people who are either part of the Democratic base or that number of persuadables by this ostentatious and, as Reuters does point out, basically ineffectual. You're not going to stop Israel because you're withholding this one shipment. It's mostly symbolic. And he is trying to average out support by offending this group and then offending that group. In the news business, people always say, well, if both sides are mad at you, you probably did something right. And that's not a bad rule of thumb. In politics, it is. And because it points to a person who lacks conviction, and it points to this sort of shuttle diplomacy that Biden is very guilty of.
All right. Up next, we have in our own city, the protesters at George Washington University who were occupying 4 city blocks. And I looked up the regulations to protest in Washington, D.C., and you need a permit. They were definitely protesting illegally, and the police had initially refused to come in and eventually agreed to come in. And our friend Josh Kraushaar commented that the student newspaper, the George Washington University Hatchet, was scooping the Washington Post in its own backyard on the clearing of the campus anti-Israel encampment, which happened at 3 a.m. one morning this week, which, again, I think we've talked about a lot, that the Post swings, and it doesn't even swing, it just misses on major stories taking place in the city of Washington.
Yeah, and I wonder on the days that on the day that happened, what stories the Washington Post had about protests in other places. And I bet this is just a hunch, but I bet we'd find them.
Chris, you had flagged this really excellent piece from the Atlantic by Jill Flipovic. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah,
I think that's right.
And the headline is, "Say plainly what the protesters want. Euphemism serves no one." And she started with a Washington Post piece that we had talked about here, that it was headlined, "They criticized Israel. This account upended their lives." But and I'm going to read from her piece, but talking about how the language and demands of and the way the protesters are talked about are cloaked in euphemism, starting with the fact that they're referred to as anti-war protesters, when in reality they say by any means necessary and advocate violence against their political opponents. So she said, here's a sadly typical example of the phenomenon I'm seeing. The Washington Post recently published an article headline, "They criticized Israel. This Twitter account upended their lives." This story by the reporter Pranshu Verma looked at the organization Stop Anti-Semitism, which, according to the Post summary, has flagged hundreds of people who have criticized Israel's actions in Gaza. Many were swiftly fired. But that's not actually an accurate description of the reality that the Post is reporting. The people, it's starting with the account is called Stop Anti-Semitism, not Stop Criticizing Israel. The people featured in this article did not simply criticize Israel or its actions in Gaza. One woman was fired from her job at a branding firm for a video in which she declared that, quote, radical solidarity with Palestine means not apologizing for Hamas. Refusing to say a bad word about a U.S. designated foreign terrorist group is undoubtedly not the way her firm wanted to be branded. Another person, a therapist, was caught on video ripping down a poster of Israeli hostages. She subsequently promoted the conspiracy theory that the Israelis taken by Hamas on October 7th were actually kidnapped by their own country. She said later she hadn't meant what she'd said, but she torn down the poster because it used the term Hamas terrorists, which undermined the Palestinian cause. Her clinic, the Post reported, fired her. If the public is to understand the protests, then journalists need to give a sense of proportion, or at least attempt to cover what average demonstrators think and why they show up. But they also need to do exactly what protesters ask, which is to clearly articulate those organizers' demands and positions. And for people who are horrified by the war but do not support Hamas or like-minded groups, and who do not champion the destruction of Israel or the mass expulsion and murder of millions of Jews that they fear would come with the end of the state, it's especially important to understand and take seriously what protest leaders are saying.
Hear, hear.
It was a really, really good piece. And
Tell
a
it to-
real indictment of a lot of the media coverage.
Tell it to Greta Thunberg.
Really good. And Chris, next we have a Guardian piece, like family.
Could have been Facile Files.
3
but
women.
Topically, we'll keep it here.
2 Palestinian, 1 Jewish find peace amid campus chaos. Take it away.
Well, if it were rare that there were Jewish people who were protesting, you would say, "Wow, I can't believe it. I cannot believe that a Jewish person, Jewish American, has joined these protests." But there are a number of Jewish Americans who are protesting the war and who are anti-Zionist Jews. This is not a new or unusual thing. What made this piece, and we shouldn't pick on it, it's the Guardian. I know, but the facileness here early. This is a deep tease on Facile Files. The facileness here of, can you believe it that these 2 Palestinian and 1 Jewish gal, that they can get together and agree when everybody else doesn't agree? I wonder why. I wonder what the explanation for this would be. And doing this little Prairie Home Companion piece on these 3 fun-loving gals is just, I mean, it was a wow. So I had to flag it.
Okay. Shall we talk 2024?
Yes, let's please.
Okay. Harpers had a big piece on the race for second place.
I liked this piece. It's Kyle Paletta writing at Harpers, and it was a look at the way the press covered the Republican primaries. And I know that happened a while ago, what seems like an eternity ago. But it's a very insightful piece that talks about how campaign coverage has changed. This is very close to my heart, right? Because this is something that I've been involved in since the 2004 cycle when I was but a wee shaver. And the evolution of how campaign coverage goes, what are we doing, right? Why do we go? And a big change, of course, is that there's the old notion about the boys on the bus and Teddy White and, of course, Hunter S. Thompson. But there's this old idea about, yeah, there's a campaign bus, there's a campaign plane, people are on, they're covering, they're watching the candidate up close, and they're doing all of that stuff. And the writer makes a good point. What made John McCain's famous Straight Talk Express noteworthy was that that was already over, right? So we're talking here about 2000 and 2008, but that was already over. So that was shtick. That was not really the old school trail style campaign coverage. That was like going into a old timey photo session when you're at Disneyland wearing a prospector's cap. The truth is that when you go, and you go to New Hampshire, you go to Iowa, you go to South Carolina, you go to these places, the number of foreign journalists frequently outnumbers the number of American journalists, because they're there to, they need a hook. You know, why does Finland care about how does Finland cover the American presidential election? You cover an event. Hey, there's a thing happening. Let's go look at that and tell the Finns about it. The American press, how does the American press cover campaigns? Poorly and seldom, but mostly through what is being posted and what is being said, because there is just not much interaction between the press and the people they're covering. And there's not that much interaction between the people they're covering and the people, right? We have town halls, we have events, Nikki Haley. So that's a long way of saying, how did Nikki Haley get so much coverage? Because she was actually doing stuff, right? She was holding town halls. She was barnstorming across Iowa. So did Ronnie D, right? They're doing stuff and there's something to cover. And the conceit within the coverage, though, was, but this doesn't really matter. And it was one of the things that really, really hacked me off during the 2020 coverage was how much and how often journalists were talking about how none of it matters. And that's not cool, right? We don't know. And just cover it. Just cover it.
I agree with all of that.
It's a good piece. Way to go, Harpers.
We have a duo of RFK pieces. This might have been,
Amazeballs.
I mean, okay. The Wall Street Journal has Inside RFK's Chaotic White House Bid. And the Times had the unforgettable RFK Jr. says doctors found a dead worm in his brain.
Just wild.
Which was like, I wished I had not read that. It was apparently a parasite. So the Journal writes, the Kennedy campaign includes family members and several people from his anti-vaccine group, Children's Health Defense. His communications director, Del Bigtree, runs another major anti-vaccine group and spoke at a rally a block from the Capitol on January 6th. Essentially, it's a collection of eccentric characters, as one would imagine. Bigtree said in an email that the event was, quote, dedicated to medical freedom, not to the election of President Trump. Several staffers fear the electromagnetic radiation from microwave ovens, complicating a volunteer potluck. People were advised to bring crockpots. The campaign has paid eye-popping salaries to some staffers with seemingly little experience, including an $8,000 a month fee to a digital strategist who graduated from high school in 2021. And the Beacon reported that they hired a TikTok influencer who had worked for Vivek Ramaswamy. So there are, weird, but I think not unexpected overlaps.
Yes, I think that's right. And the New York Times clickbait prize, and I don't know that I could have resisted it either. The RFK Jr. says doctors found a dead worm in his brain. How could you not click? How could you not look? And then the Times did a subsequent follow-up about dead worms in brains generally. The word combination of dead worm and brain goes right to a very visceral part of our biological psychology and freaks people out. So they wrung another piece out of it. And I noted also that MSNBC did a sit-down interview, and I think their first, Ari Melber did an interview with RFK Jr. And I have a theory about all of the and I'm making air quotes as I say, hit pieces on RFK Jr. Neither side can decide which candidate RFK Jr. is a bigger threat. And in an election this close, they go back and forth. Well, is it worse for Biden? Is it worse for Trump? Is it worse for Biden? Is it worse for Trump? I think we've now reached the point where both sides figure he's a credible threat, and this opens up the free fire zone in the rules of combat. Because previously you had right-wing outlets sort of encouraging, in the beginning, very openly encouraging RFK Jr. because they thought, oh, this guy, when he was running as a Democrat and then left the Democratic Party, they thought, oh, this guy's going to be a spoiler. And then they saw him on the January 6th stuff, and they saw him on other things, and on the vaccine question, they thought, oh, maybe he's a bigger threat to Trump. Trump himself has vacillated back and forth. He's enthusiastic, loves RFK Jr. Now he's the worst, most liberal person of all time. The talk about metronome, Trump's metronome swings so widely, the box tips over. But the on the left, the growing confidence that RFK Jr. will hurt Trump allows them to do what they didn't want to do before, which is give him airtime and give him space. So they went from we're going to freeze him out to now we're going to take him down. And I think you can see that. And that's, I shouldn't ascribe all these cynical motives, because there's another motive here, which is it's just fascinating, right? He's a former heroin addict who has a dead worm in his brain, who is garnering 8-10% of the vote nationally. He's famous. He sounds weird. His wife is a celebrity. Who could resist the story?
I totally agree. And of course, the debate over who he's going to suck more support from is on. I anticipate that both sides are going to spend gobs of money against this guy. I think a ton of money is going to be spent on RFK, and he's going to be a major player in the race because nobody's quite sure where this is going to land. And he is fascinating and interesting, and people want to watch him and hear about him, which is not true of other third-party candidates.
Yes, that is for sure.
We got to talk about the Kristi Noem book tour.
Oh man.
I mean, she is called off apparently, and Mediaite reports that she called off the book tour, canceling hits on Fox News and CNN at the last minute. On Gutfeld on Tuesday, Gutfeld told his audience that Noem canceled at the last minute due to the weather, quote unquote. I don't believe it. I think it's a little too late to keep her on a short leash. I hope she'd reconsider, but I'm not going to sit up and beg, Gutfeld said. I can't imagine how this could have been any more disastrous. And I loved when she said, we'll get that in edits, or, about meeting the leader of North Korea and various things. And did anybody ask her, sorry, did you write the book?
Well, she blamed the ghostwriters. They threw the ghostwriter under the bus first, and then
I didn't see that. So
yeah. It was the ghostwriter. We've notified the ghostwriter of our disappointment.
She said that?
Yeah. And then somebody said, "Hey, you recorded the audiobook. Hey, here you are saying it. You didn't stop at that moment and say, "Oh my gosh, we cannot go forward." I can't say that. So no one needs our joining the Greg Gutfelds of the world to heap scorn on Kristi Noem. She is a smoking crater in the crust of the earth. But this was for me, a very interesting story about, can you brazen it out? Brazening it out was a term that one of the many that came to us from Watergate. And this was, I think Nixon himself said it, or whoever said it. But it was revealed in tapes about, what are we going to do about this? And the answer was, we're going to brazen it out. We're just going to hang it out there. And when they say that we're lying, we're going to say, before everybody abused the term gaslighting, you could brazen it out. You could just say, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? And the media strategy that Noem was following was, we're just going to do what we had all of these interviews set that were, and it was contemporaneous to the big Trump reality show VP cattle call down at Mar-a-Lago, and this was really going to be the shank of her VP candidacy. And the decision pretty obviously was, well, we have all these bookings done. We've already arranged to appear on all these shows. So we're just going to do it. We're going to do it all. And we have our line and we're going to stick to it. And she did it. And she appeared with Fox Business's Stuart Varney. And it was a catastrophe. It was it was massive,
like one after another, after another, after another. It was painful.
And the thing about brazening it out, if you decide that you want to brazen it out, you gotta eat the whole thing.
Yeah,
right?
Finish it. See it through.
You don't take the dog out to the gravel pit and just graze it, right? You gotta see it through. And for a person whose narrative was, yeah, it's unpopular, yeah, it's bad, yeah, I shot my dog, so what? That life's hard. For a person who does that and then says, oh, but I can't go on Gutfeld, that's not how you do it. So this was just as not that I want to give politicians advice on how to manipulate the media, but if you want to go the brazen route, you got to go to the Steve Bannon school of brazenness if you want to survive.
Well, I think she's now like slunk Offset and knows that she's clearly shot her VP chances like she shot cricket. In my view, I think she's certainly out of the running.
Well, yes, but the amazing thing about Donald Trump and our current moment in politics is, yes, I can only say yes, probably. I can only say yes, probably.
I think it's 100% yes.
I think you're probably right.
No way.
You're probably right. You're 99% right.
I am 101% right. All right. Up next, we got media biz news and the Pulitzers. Oh my God. We should do a whole episode on the Pulitzers.
Well, I knew from previous years that this would be a freighted subject. How much do we really want to talk about the Pulitzers?
I mean, they become so irrelevant because of the blatant politicization of the prizes that it's now like comical. But do you want to talk a little bit about your dispatch piece?
So I'm unabashed in my love for Kevin Williamson, who it may be the best writer on the right working today. I think as a periodical journalist, I don't know that there is anybody better than him, and he's doing it with newborn triplets at home. So the mad respect, and he's my friend, and I like the dude. So he does this, and he had been on the story, and we talked about it here when the Washington Post did this whole thing on the AR-15 and how misleading and either intentionally misleading or stunningly ignorant for a series of pieces that set out to be comprehensive and take this deep dive. So he wrote about it at the time, and you could predict it right as rain that the Pulitzer Prize Committee would say, that's the one. That's the one we like. And for me to check the box on Pulitzer Prize coverage this year, I just commend Kevin's piece to you all because it's great and it's mwah.
Can we talk about what I think is a companion to that, which is the Pulitzer that went to the ProPublica pieces on their coverage of billionaires and the court, which we also talked about on this podcast, and which had literally zero real life impact, like no impact on this world, but which, touched on the erogenous zones of the left wing about how the Supreme Court is an illegitimate, corrupt institution because conservatives have a majority on it. So, of course, those pieces were awarded Pulitzers. And the New York Times was awarded a Pulitzer in international reporting for its coverage of Gaza, and notably did not include in its submission packet the piece screams without words about Hamas's rape of Israeli women. And so they get the Pulitzer, but leave out in their submission this piece that stirred controversy in their own newsroom. I mean, the whole thing is incredible.
Yes. So Pulitzers, woof.
All right. Up next, we have Jack Schaefer writing. I want to get the headline right. The collapse of the news industry is taking its soul down with it. The decline of the media is sapping journalism of a crucial tool. And the first paragraph is lovely. Wounded and limping, doubting its own future, American journalism seems to be losing a quality that carried it through a century and a half of trials. It's swagger. Swagger is the conformity-killing practice of journalism, often done in defiance of authority and custom, to tell a true story in its completeness, no matter whom it might offend. It causes some people to subscribe and others to cancel their subscription, and gives journalists the necessary courage and direction to do their best work. Swagger was once journalism's calling card, but in recent decades it's been sidelined. In some venues, reporters now do their work with all the passion of an accountant, and it shows in their guarded, couched, and equivocating copy. Instead of relishing controversy, today's newsrooms shy away from publishing true stories that someone might claim cause harm, that modern term that covers all emotional distress, or even worse, which could offend powerful interests.
Jack
And
Schaefer really,
the thing
he nailed it.
The thing that I really like about this piece is that he gets to how so many journalists are heard like conformists. There's so much groupthink, and it's antithetical to what journalism is supposed to be.
And the lack of fun, the swagger problem is related to the fun problem. And he said about Christopher Hitchens. He talks about Mary McGrory. He talks about Michael Kelly, Nora Ephron. The idea that once you have all of these fun, they were iconoclastic, they were snarky sometimes, they were interesting. And now the flattening and audience capture leads us to a lot of very predictable, boring pap that comes out. How often are you surprised by something that you read from a big name, right? Maureen Dowd still does it. He mentions Olivia Nuzzi, and there are people who do it, right? There are people who still say, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But most of it you can see coming from a mile away, because most of it is reverse engineered to obtain the desired outcome from the audience. And one of the things that I try to do is, as Pee Wee Reese said, hit them where they ain't. I try to push myself to looking at things from different, because if we're not doing that, right? If we're just hacks who are giving everybody what we think they want all the time, and there's a corollary to this. People don't know what they want. If they knew what they want, so we're doing market research down a well, and we're getting an echo that comes back to us. The way to be is to do what you like. Be David Bowie, not Mick Jagger. Create stuff that you find interesting and that you want to do. Don't become a cover band of yourself.
I love this paragraph about Christopher Hitchens where he says, if he were resurrected today, who would hire him? And if they did, how long would it take for the staff to petition the bosses to fire him?
Word.
Totally. Joe Kahn, the executive editor of the New York Times, did an interview with Semaphore. And I think it's worth noting, this is the second interview he's done with non-New York Times publications, essentially crapping on the New York Times. And I can't imagine that internally folks at the Times are too happy with this. So he talks in this piece about, he's responding to arguments from the left that essentially the Times needs to do more coverage of how anti-democratic Trump is, and to be more pro-Biden. So Ben Smith at Semaphore says, Dan Pfeiffer, who used to work for Barack Obama, recently wrote of the Times, they do not see their job as saving democracy or stopping an authoritarian from taking power. Then he asks, why don't you see your job as we've got to stop Trump? What about your job doesn't let you think that way? And he says, it's our job to cover the full range of issues the people have. At the moment, democracy is one of them, but it's not the top one. Immigration happens to be the top of polls, and the economy and inflation is the second. Should we stop covering those things because they're favorable to Trump and minimize them? I don't even know how it's supposed to work in the view of Dan Pfeiffer or the White House. We become an instrument of the Biden campaign. We turn ourselves into Xinhua News Agency or Pravda and put out a stream of stuff that's very, very favorable to them and only write negative stories about the other side. And that would accomplish what? And he pushes back strongly on the view that the Times should be I think that in the view of these people, pro-democracy and pro-Biden are the same thing. And I think Khan argues that that is not the case.
Yeah. And as we referred earlier, and you mentioned that when the Wall Street Journal thought they had a real beatdown, and Khan is the executive editor, they thought they had a real beatdown on the Times because there was another sort of Tom Cotton-esque revolt happening, this time about Israel coverage. And they thought they had a good beat. And Khan said, I'll talk to you. And that's where he said, I think a lot of these young people who went to these very elite colleges do not have a proper understanding of how a newsroom works. And I definitely took notice of that. And then this interview with Semaphore, he, to use a overused phrase, a shop-worn phrase, he doubles down and says, grow up. And more of that, please.
And finally, in our news media coverage, we have ABC News president Kim Godwin stepping down. I really have not read a positive word about this woman, I have to say. And it's interesting. Like, she is an African-American woman who, like the coverage sort of suggested, was a quote-unquote diversity hire. And the way I read it, like all of the campus stuff, and this is just my sense, sort of fed into like tide turning against these kinds of hires, and I think made it easier for ABC to shove her out the door.
Yeah, she had
was
that
not
bad
competent.
memo. She had that
was
bad
not
memo.
competent.
Yeah, I forget what it was, but it was about such and so is definitively racist and stuff like that. And as I read this, I thought, over to you, Catherine Marr. We'll start the countdown clock on Catherine Marr at NPR.
So ABC layered her, and she had someone above her for months. But Axios writes, for months, reports have described an increasingly hostile environment for Godwin within ABC News as staffers began to lose confidence in her leadership. I mean, I think that happened a long time ago. Sources told Axios that the main sentiment felt by staff was that Godwin was more focused on promoting herself as a leader rather than investing time with ABC News' staff and show teams. Well, that sounds bad.
Sounds bad.
So she's gone. Chris, that brings us to our facile files. Up first, we have exclusive poll. Most college students shrug at nationwide protests. Over to you, because it's a poll.
So this is from Axios. Exclusive poll. They say it's exclusive. Most college students shrug at nationwide protests. And college protests against Israel's war in Gaza are dominating headlines, but only a sliver of students are participating or view it as a top issue, according to a new Generation Lab survey shared exclusively with Axios. Now, I'm not going to denounce or criticize the methodology of the poll, except in this one way, which is as a caution always on issue polling. Here is your caution on issue polling. Issue polling done very well by very good pollsters is possible, but extraordinarily hard. It's extraordinarily hard. And you need clear options. You need to present clear options for people. And usually these are binary options. Do you want this or that? Do you want more of this or less of that? That can be done. But you can't do open-ended. What do you care about? Because people, there's a lot that tells us that There's a social bias toward saying that you care about things that other people care about. There's a lot of problems with open-ended questions. So then your other option is, I'm going to give you a list of things. I'm going to give you a list of things. So I want you to hear what this Axios Partner Generation Lab offered college students in this survey. What matters most to you? Is it healthcare reform, educational funding and access, economic fairness, racial justice and civil rights, climate change, gun control, immigration policies, national security, terrorism, or the conflict in the Middle East? And do you notice anything about those questions? Does anything strike you about the range of options that these students are given?
Do tell.
They're all left except for immigration and national security. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They have 6 that are straight left, right? Do you care about healthcare reform? Do you care about educational funding and access, economic fairness? They don't say the economy, right? They don't say the job market. They don't say those things. They don't say the cost of energy. They give all of these, and look, college students are way more progressive, way more left than the population as a whole. We know that. That's always true. And it's been particularly true in the Trump era. And that's all true. But this is just such an effulgent example of how misleading bad issue polling can be. Because if they would have put on there, getting a job, how about getting a good job when I get out of college? Probably be pretty high. It would probably be pretty high. If they said the cost of, I don't even think, they don't have inflation. They do not have the number one, the number 2 issue, 1 or 2 issue in the country is inflation. They don't even ask them about that. So what would this poll look like? So this is, again, reverse engineering. These are the things that they want to talk about, and then they ask people to rank them. And though the good news here is that for anybody who wanted this to be a poll that said how much students care about Israel, they didn't even get there.
Next up, are we talking too much about mental health?
This is a little unfair because I'm glad they did it.
New York Times.
This piece in the New York Times by Ellen Berry.
It could have been one word and just been yes.
Yeah, that's the facileness here is about treating this like well, maybe. And so I'm glad that the Times is coming around on this and taking it seriously and doing it, but the therapeuticization of youth particularly, and the effect on children and young people to emphasize questions of mental health and to put things in therapeutic language and to use the language of mental health for ordinary things. And what happens when you're not scared, you have trauma. What happens when you're not nervous about something, but you have anxiety? The diagnostic nature of talking about the normal things of life is part of our big fragility problem that we have in America, and that there's lots of good work, lots of good research on this out there. So I shouldn't call it facile, but it's still, as you say, what makes it facile is, yes,
So
we have
obvious.
a one-word answer, which is, yeah, I think we are.
I love this. In a paper published last year, 2 research psychologists at the University of Oxford coined the term prevalence inflation, driven by the reporting of mild or transient symptoms as mental health disorders, and suggested that awareness campaigns were contributing to it. It's creating this message that teenagers are vulnerable, they're likely to have problems, and the solution is to outsource them to a professional, said Dr. Folks, Prudence Trust Research Fellow in Oxford's Department of Experimental Psychology, was written 2 books on mental health and adolescence. Yeah. And finally, to wrap our Facile Files section, we have the Wall Street Journal, desperate for workers, but dead set against migrant labor. The West Virginia dilemma. Chris, this is your home turf.
Oh, I hate it so much. It's a real bummer This is the Wall Street Journal doing Hillbillies in the Mist, and writer Paul Kernan, desperate for workers but dead set against migrant laborers, the West Virginia dilemma, he says. And the line that I'll pick out one. Local historians said the state has long been wary of outsiders, not just from other countries, but from other states. West Virginians don't want immigration of any kind, said Stephen Smoot, editor of the Pendleton Times newspaper. There is even antipathy toward come-heres from nearby metropolitan areas who move in and look down their noses at locals, Smoot said. Voters picked Wild and Wonderful as the state official slogan in 2007. Wild and Wonderful has been associated with West Virginia since the 70s, and it was restored as the state's motto after, and that had to do with Joe Manchin and changing the state sign to be open for business, which was just horrible. The most horrible. Your state slogan is open for business. I mean, what's the best thing if the best thing that you can say about a place is that, yeah, it's open. Like they used to have signs on the interstate that said that a place was a certified business location. Oh, okay. Like that's saying this is meat, the potted meat, technically meat. But anyway, the Wild and Wonderful thing dates way back in West Virginia. It's not a new thing. It's not a different thing. We had that before we had Almost Heaven, because John Denver gave us Almost Heaven in the late 1970s. Harumph, harumph, harumph. But this points to the facileness of this piece that talks about these benighted hillbilly goblins living up in the valleys who are wary of outsiders, blah, 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 blah. West Virginia's history of welcoming immigrants is long and deep. And you know how I know? You know what the state food of West Virginia is? It's the pepperoni roll. Why is it the pepperoni roll? Because so many, including the forebearers of Senator Joe Manchin.
Good. I don't even know what that is.
It's
I'm looking
very
it up
good
right now.
It's a soft, sweet dough, lightly sweet white dough, into which
this looks so good.
Is gently folded, some slices, not stick, weirdos. You don't want the stick pepperoni. Some slices of pepperoni and then baked. And that's all there is. It's just those two things. It's dough and pepperoni. And then the pepperoni cooks in there and it gives its delicious orange ooze of grease. No, some people put cheese in their pepperoni rolls, but some people are bad. And I acknowledge that some people, that the human nature has fallen.
This looks really good.
Yes, the correct pepperoni roll. Why do we have pepperoni rolls in West Virginia?
Because, oh my gosh. This is really funny. There's some West Virginia, one of the things that came up in my Google, poll results, we can get your analysis, is a pepperoni roll a sandwich?
I think it's a roll, but I put it in the category with bao and hot dogs, tacos, a lot of things that are pseudo sandwiches or sandwich adjacent.
The vast majority of people said it is not a sandwich.
It's a roll. But this piece fails to acknowledge. So you have they conflate the anti-immigration rhetoric around the U.S. border that's taking place. West Virginia on Tuesday has its gubernatorial primary, and it's been a real, it's gross, right? It's mostly being litigated around the question of who is softer on transgenderism, but everybody is hard line on border security. And to conflate the idea that people in West Virginia want the border secure with the idea that people in West Virginia don't want outsiders to come was the laziest Appalachian, the professor who talks about looking down their noses. Well, here's some good nose looking down. Here's some excellent nose looking down on West Virginia. This piece goes in my Hall of Shame for Hillbillies in the Mist coverage.
Okay, and then in our follow file, we have New York Times piece. Honeybees invaded my house and no one would help.
So you remember?
Oh my God. I remember your piece about the bees.
Yep. The Washington Post.
Now.
Yes, the Washington Post got to the bee story first and we lauded them at the time. Said, hey, actually maybe the pollinator apocalypse did not happen. Okay, good. They did it. And now you know that the trend is on because the New York Times does the bee menace story. So we went from save the pollinators to actually the pollinators are okay. And now we have crossed over to the bee menace.
Well, I want to see what I didn't read this story, and I want to see what happened to this person. This is crazy. Oh my gosh. This is horrifying. And all right, I got to read this and report back on it next week.
It's the bee menace. The bee menace is with us. Fear the pollinator.
Oh, I fear this. There's pictures of them in her vacuum.
It's too many bees. It's too many pollinators.
It said the beekeeper suggested vacuuming them. Oh my God. Okay, Chris, that brings us to our style section, where the Journal had a great piece about Andy Cohen and Bravo.
I flagged this for you. I want credit for the fact that
You did.
am feeding your fascination with the housewives.
Well, I think we've talked about the various claims against Andy Cohen that have been filed by the housewife. There's a lot of controversy around reality TV right now because the reality TV stars want more residuals. And then there are claims by various housewives that he, including lawsuits, that he pressured them to drink alcohol or do drugs surrounding the shows. And so this is a great profile of Andy Cohen amidst all these complaints. And I saw an alert this morning that Bravo had cleared him of an internal workplace investigation. I'm totally predicting this guy comes out on top. I don't think anything's going to take him down. He's not going to be Me Too'd. I don't see these women taking this guy down.
I look to you for all Bravo coverage, and I will abide with you. I will abide with you, sister.
I don't see anything bringing him down. No, but I recommend this piece. It's great. And that brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And mine was an excellent piece in Tablet magazine by Park McDougald that took a look at the outside groups involved in the campus protests. The headline is "The People Setting America on Fire, an investigation into the witch's brew of billionaires, Islamists, and leftists behind the campus protests." And it is a really thorough investigation of what groups were involved in this, what exactly was their involvement, because it's complicated. And one important point that I think Park makes in the piece is that Eric Adams and many of the university leaders have talked about the quote unquote infiltration of the protests, student protests by outside agitators. And he really makes the point that they were working hand in hand, that the outsiders were offering help to the students were accepting that help, and that it was a lot of different groups and sort of diffused, but he goes through them, but that this was a cooperative effort. And I'll just read one paragraph where he notes the first hint that the protests are not entirely organic is their striking resemblance to previous rounds of organized far-left agitation, from the uprising of summer 2020 to the rolling Antifa versus Proud Boys brawls of 2016-17. The creation of liberated or autonomous zones on campus, for instance, is a hallmark of anarchist organizing, familiar from Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone and New York's City Hall Autonomous Zone 4 summers ago. Familiar, too, is the governance of these zones, with masked security details prohibiting filming from outsiders and directing reporters to trained media representatives. So a really, really thorough, interesting piece.
Excellent. I'm for thorough and interesting. My obsession is about what in the heck is wrong with higher education, continues to be what the heck is wrong with higher education. And by the way, my eldest man-child celebrated his 16th birthday yesterday. So I'm very much these days thinking about college and what college is for and what college is about. I wrote a piece about my own college experience this week for the Dispatch. So that's where I am. And these protests have heightened my alertness on the subject. And I don't know whether you saw the congressman from Georgia, Mike Collins, posted this clip of these frat or frat adjacent bros at Ole Miss acting just awfully, including one guy making gorilla gestures to a black female protester, and just trash. And the question I have about the anti-Israel and the anti-Israel protests and all of this stuff is, what is anyone doing, right? Why are you there? And I hate to be this person that I am, and I mentioned this last week. I hate the fact that I, once described as an indifferent student, now find myself as the guy who says, get to class, you shut up and do your homework. They need to give these kids more work so they don't have time to be out there doing this. But there is this profound unseriousness to higher education. And this piece in The Atlantic speaks to part of it. Headline, "No one knows what universities are for." Derek Thompson writes this piece. And there are many reasons that higher education in the United States today is a mess. Has to do with subsidies, has to do with safetyism, has to do with a million billion things. But one point that Thompson points out is the bloat of administrations in higher education. And much as we saw in primary and secondary education, the ranks of the administration swell and swell and swell and serve as a choke point to that prevents resources and emphasis to flow to the actual classroom and to the actual students. And if you have deans upon deans upon deans upon administrators, it becomes much harder to have real academic freedom. It becomes much harder to have actual learning and debate going on in life if you turn it into any institution that you choke with middle management will not be a healthy organization. And that's what Thompson points to. And that's, I think, one of the stories about higher ed. Good piece.
All right, Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have a note from Jason Penny in Tampa, Florida, who writes, "Eliana and Chris, love listening to the podcast each week. I often scoff at the absurdity of many of the headlines and story subjects you guys discuss because I think they're better suited for The Onion or the Babylon Bee. That is until I came across one of those headlines myself and immediately thought about the two of you. Not because of the headline itself, if you know what I mean, but because I'm interested to hear your opinion regarding the oh-so-profound question put forth in the headline. And the headline is, why are LGBTQ plus people more at risk for climate change?
Wow. Where did this appear? In what publication?
The publication is called Context, Know Better, Do Better. And it says, what's the context? Natural disasters caused by climate change can adversely affect LGBTQ plus people already suffering from poverty and discrimination. LGBTQ plus people face discrimination and relief efforts. Worst affected countries intolerant towards LGBTQ plus rights. I mean, I can't even read it.
That just amazing. This is like if there was a facile bot that we built, it could not surpass what the Thomson Reuters Foundation.
It's based on a study out of UCLA that says climate change risk for LGBT people in the United States. Using
Amazing.
U.S. Census data and climate risk as speaking of what are universities for?
That's
from
what
NASA,
they're for.
This study
That's
provides
what
a
they're
geographic analysis to assess the climate risk impacting same-sex couples. And it says they disproportionately live in coastal areas and cities, which is why they're more affected.
Huh. Who knew? Who knew? Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say, Jason Penny, alert reader, you were smelling what I was smoking. You were picking up what I was putting down.
Amazing. All right, that brings us to our favorite items of the week, where I am forced to say something nice, but Chris, please lead us by example.
Washington Post, senior homes refuse to pick up fallen residents, dial 911. Why are they calling us? Now, in the spirit of dull disclosure, this is written by a friend of mine, Todd Frankel, who is a reporter at the Washington Post. And I probably shouldn't say for Todd's sake that he is my friend, but he is always been a great reporter. I worked with him in Charleston, West Virginia, and he is a great general assignment kind of reporter. And this is a fabulous story in which Todd went out to Rockford, Illinois, and talks about this very, and I'm sorry to say boring, but real problem that we're facing in the country, which is we have a lot of old people and we have a lot of lawyers and we have a lot of safety, back to safetyism. And so when these senior care facilities have a problem, what do? They call the local fire department. When somebody falls down, they say, call in the authorities. We're not going to handle that here because they don't want to get sued. They don't want to deal with it. And this is then a strain on local fire departments. And this is the opposite of that piece in the Wall Street Journal. This is going to a place, talking about things, doing it right. It's really good. And it really helped me think about a problem that I had not thought about. And it was really good.
My favorite is a Wall Street Journal piece. We talk about our work culture being soft and therapeutic. This is about China's work culture. And the headline is, "I'm Not Your Mom. Tech execs' videos spark clash over China's work culture. Search giant Baidu fires its head of public relations after she outraged Gen Z workers." And the quotable quote was, "I'm not your mother-in-law. I'm not your mom." Ku Jing, a vice president at Chinese search giant Baidu, said in one widely excoriated clip, referring to a colleague who was struggling with a recent breakup, "I only care about your results." In other videos, she criticized employees who didn't want to work weekends and dismissed complaints from one subordinate that messages she sent to a group chat late at night had kept a crying child awake. "Why should it be my business that your child was crying?" she said. It's a wonderful read.
Look out, Beacon. That's all I can say is
Yes,
look out.
we are going to pick this woman up while she is down. The door is open. Door is open.
I love it.
Okay. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Jennifer Hupfel in Colin Chicola's absence. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.